Hi, everyone. Bear with me, I'm a bit out of practice with public speaking. But yeah, I was given the verse Matthew 2, 1 to 12. And the title is The Magi, the Magi's Divine Encounter, a Savior for All Nations. If somebody could read, please. Oh, yeah.
So, of course, you might want to share it.
Okay. The Magi visit the Messiah. Yes? Can I go ahead? Okay. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests, and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. And as soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route.
Thank you. Okay. What I first pulled from this is that the Magi were the first people to recognize the deity of Christ, and that he had already been born. For context, that was said last week, is the Magi essentially were early practitioners of Zoroastrianism or some sort of early Iranian faiths. So they were well versed in reading the stars, so they practiced astrology and astronomy and the natural sciences, so they were quite well versed in those sort of areas. So essentially what I pulled from that is God knew how to find them. It wasn't in the Jewish scriptures, because clearly they didn't know what the prophecy wrote, because they followed the stars to get to Judea. They didn't know the prophecy said that the King of the Jews would be born in Bethlehem. Yeah. So, after they had heard the king, they went on their way. And the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. I think when we think of Christianity, most people's knee-jerk reaction is to think of the religion and the structures, but even with the birth of Christ, the birth of our Savior, the first people to recognize his deity were people who worship the stars. And that's where they found him. They found God in the stars, and then through that, God led them to him. And they were the first people to find him. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed, you know? Yeah. So no matter where you are, like, you can't stray too far away from God so that he can't pull you back. Because how crazy is it they found God in the stars, and then they were obedient enough to follow him from that. They were following the star to Judea. Anyway. But yeah, they came bearing gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And the only other time in the Bible where we find all these things together is in the temple and the tabernacle. Gold was used in the Holy of Holies, so the innermost room. It was overlaid, the whole entire room was overlaid in gold, and the ark itself was like cast in pure gold. So what does that symbolize? The divinity of Christ. In a way that the priests, when they entered the Holy of Holies, it was only a specific priest that could go in there at a certain point in the day, or like at certain days of the year. Through they'd spend, the months, they'd spend preparing themselves, going through this purification process just to enter the presence of the Lord. But we find that the Magi were bringing gold as an offering to baby Jesus. I think that means, well, in my opinion, I think that means that, we no longer have to, go through this purification of, how do I put this in words? Well, yeah, there's no more ritual. We can meet God where we are. He came down to meet us where we were. Yeah. Yeah, also, frankincense. The process of making frankincense is very long. It's quite an arduous, it's a very tedious process where you have to make incisions in the tree, and you have to bleed the tree, and it's very slow, and you collect the gum that pours out of it. And in the temple, in the tabernacle, it was only you'd only find it in the courtyard area. And when it's burned, it's like a nice sweet fragrance, and it kind of represents the prayers going up to God. But the reason why the Magi brought it is symbolic of Jesus' his willingness to become the sacrifice for us. Because it's a slow process where they're able to collect it and process it to be used as an offering. And it's kind of it's symmetrical to Jesus becoming the burnt offering, his process of bearing the cross, carrying it, being tortured, and then eventually being pierced in his side, where blood and water ran out separately. And it's not symbolic of our separation from sin through himself being the burnt offering. But yeah, the last one being myrrh. And like frankincense, it's obtained through the trees. Like myrrh is being obtained through the trees, and it's drained, but this was used completely different. It's used in the embalming process, where they use it to embalm the corpses and prep them for, burial. But also, it can be mixed with wine, and then it's used as a crude anesthetic. And actually, further on in Matthew 27-34 is where Jesus, where he was on the cross, and before he died, they prepped it for him, the mixture of the gall, the myrrh and the wine, to give it to him, and he refused it. And in Hebrews 2:9, where it says, where he might taste death for everyone, because he tasted it, and then he refused to drink it. Yeah, and I just think it's so interesting that Some people find God in the church or in the community of other people. Some people find God in a song, in a message, in numbers or synchronicities, but God isn't divorced from anything in creation. So wherever people come to find him, that's where you find him. Some people would never step foot in church a day in their lives, but they'll talk about how, they find this love that they can't explain, or they have a conversation with someone and they just feel so exacted by that, just so at peace with it. And because Jesus used the Magi, the first people actually, he used these people because they were already people practicing Judaism by the time Jesus was born. Even King Herod, they were the ones who, they wanted to find him for nefarious purposes, but God used people from a completely different country practicing completely different faiths. And they were the first people to, symbolically bring these gifts to build the new temple. And I think essentially the message comes down to the fact that even as an infant, Jesus was bringing Jew and Gentile together. And, in this church, I guess we're firm believers in like a priesthood of all believers. So wherever you go, that's where God is, Yeah. That's it.